Now we have a testimony from Janese, and you're going to see how God has directed her in some key moments in her life and some major decisions that he guided her to. And again, the most important decision that we can make in our lives, the biggest decision we can make, is to give our lives to Jesus, and I hope you will. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, my name is Janese Hubbard. I grew up in a small Dutch community in Central California where there was a church on every corner. My family went to church every Sunday. I attended a Christian school for 12 years, and basically I just learned a lot about the Bible. It was probably the best Christian upbringing anybody could have. When I decided to study nursing at San Jose State, I went against the grain. Most of my high school classmates all went to the church college, but I was going to a secular school. So it was the first time in my life that I was going to go away from this nice, secure environment that I grew up in. When my senior year was ending, my high school principal came to me and said, since I was going to a secular college, that I should look up InterVarsity, which was a Christian group on campus. Well, I was really shy and very introverted, and I really had a hard time making friends. But I did go to that InterVarsity meeting during the fall semester in my freshman year. At that time, I met one of my nursing instructors, which was a total surprise to suddenly meet an instructor that I'd never had a class from. She invited me to the Nurses Christian Fellowship meetings. During one of those meetings, during the second year I was in school, I was invited to a meeting where the international director of NCF was speaking. Well, she talked about sharing your faith. And here I was in a new environment, not sure what I was supposed to say. And I watched as everyone went around the circle and gave their answer. And I was totally panicked because I had no idea what I was going to say. So it finally got to me and I said, well, I live in the dorm and I guess I'm not doing anything. Well, that surprised me that even came out of my mouth. But what seemed like the speed of light, this lady came up to me and introduced herself and invited me to a Bible study. Well, that was the beginning. I began to study the Bible, memorize verses, learn about discipleship for the first time in my life. And what I didn't know at the time was that these two women had just moved to San Jose and were praying for a contact in the dorm so they could hold Bible studies. Well, I was the first person they met from that dorm. So from then on, all the Bible studies were held in my room, and I became an active participant in sharing these Bible studies with others. Well, they invited me to a conference that spring, and it was held by the Navigators. And I realized when I was listening to the speaker that there was something missing. I had had this great upbringing. I really knew a lot about the Bible. I had learned to memorize verses now. I'd been studying the Bible, but had never really asked Jesus to come and be the Lord of my life. And so I realized at that point, I really needed to make this personal, not just a lot of head knowledge. So that night, I did ask Jesus to be the Lord of my life. So as I began to grow in my Christian life, it sounds like everything is pretty ideal, right? Well, it's not until you get out of your environment that you're used to and comfortable with that God really uses a lot of lessons to keep us growing in our Christian faith. So I spent the next few years in ministry, discipling women, and being active in the Navigator ministry. But when I was 40 years old and still single, I had a nice argument with God. I argued with him for several weeks why I was still single and at this age. And finally, I learned to have peace. That God told me, don't worry, I'll give you a good life. And you have peace with that. So I did. The pastor at our church called me a few weeks later and asked me to continue teaching a Bible study at the church. And I finally agreed because I had told him I was going to stop doing that. And so I agreed to do that. At that Bible study training that started in January, I met my future husband. And by August, we were married. So God had a way of answering plans and desires that I didn't even know were out there and just waiting for me. Let me share another time that I really had to trust the Lord. When we've been married about 10 years, God led us to be missionaries overseas. Well, there's nothing like taking yourself out of everything you know, your environment that you grew up in, you're familiar with church, you have your group of friends, and suddenly you move to another country. You think you're prepared to do that because that's what God has led you to do. But all of a sudden, everything you knew is gone. Your friends aren't around to support you. You know there are people back at home praying for you, but that's it. And you're listening to different language. You're listening to different ways of doing things within a country, and you're starting to build friendships. It's really hard when everything is taken away from you that you are familiar with. And you have nothing to do but trust the Lord. And I can remember saying to myself so many times, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, because that was the foundation that I had to rely on in a difficult situation where nothing was familiar. So God always brings circumstances into our lives where we have to trust him. No matter what our background is, no matter how much we've grown, we always have to spend our time depending on how God is leading us and strengthening us for the journey ahead. Thank you.